Hey everyone, today we're going to be doing Joshua chapter 1 through 8, so let's get right into it. After the death of Moses, the servant of the Lord said to Joshua, son of Nun, Moses' aide, Moses, my servant, is dead. Now then, you and all these people get ready to cross the Jordan River into the land I am about to give them, to the Israelites. I will give you every place where you set your foot, as I promised Moses. Your territory will extend from the desert to Lebanon and from the great river, the Euphrates, all the Hittite country to the Mediterranean Sea in the west. No one will be able to stand against you all the days of your life. As I was with Moses, so I will be with you. I will never leave you nor forsake you. Be strong and courageous, because you will lead these people to inherit the land I swore to their ancestors to give them. Be strong and very courageous. Be careful to obey all the law my servant Moses gave you. Do not turn from it to the right or to the left, that you may be successful wherever you go. Keep this book of the law always on your lips. Meditate on it day and night, so that you may be careful to do everything written in it. Then you will be prosperous and successful. Have I not commanded you? Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid. Do not be discouraged, for the Lord your God will be with you wherever you go. So Joshua ordered the officers of the people, go through the camp and tell the people, get your provisions ready. 3 days from now you will cross the Jordan here to go in and take possession of the land the Lord your God has given you for your own. But to the Reubenites, the Gadites, and the half-tribe of Manasseh, Joshua said, remember the command that Moses, the servant of the Lord, gave you after he said, the Lord your God will give you rest by giving you this land. Your wives, your children, and your livestock may stay in the land that Moses gave you east of the Jordan. All your fighting men ready for battle must cross over ahead of your fellow Israelites. You are to help them until the Lord gives them rest, as he has done for you, and until they too have taken possession of the land the Lord your God has given them. After that you may go back and occupy your own land, which Moses the servant of the Lord gave you east of the Jordan toward the sunrise. Then they answered Joshua, wherever you have commanded us we will do, and wherever you send us we will go. Just as we fully obeyed Moses, so we will obey you. Only may the Lord your God be with you as he was with Moses. Whoever rebels against your word and does not obey it, whatever you may command them, will be put to death. Only be strong and courageous. And Joshua, son of Nun, secretly sent 2 spies from Shittim. Go, look over the land, he said, especially Jericho. So they went and entered the house of a prostitute named Rahab and stayed there. The king of Jericho was told, look, some of the Israelites have come here tonight to spy out the land. So the king of Jericho sent this message to Rahab, bring out the men who came to you and enter your house, because they have come to spy out the whole land. But the woman had taken the 2 men and hidden them. She said, yes, the men came to me, but I did not know where they had come from. At dusk, when it was time to close the city gate, they left. I don't know which way they went. Go after them quickly. You may catch up with them. But she had taken them up to the roof and hidden them under the stalks of flax she had laid out on the roof. So the men set out in pursuit of the spies on the road that leads to the fords of the Jordan, and as soon as the pursuers had gone out, the gate was shut. Before the spies lay down for the night, she went up on the roof and said to them, I know that the Lord has given you this land, and that a great fear of you has fallen on us, so that all who live in this country are melting in fear because of you. We have heard how the Lord dried up the water of the Red Sea for you when you came out of Egypt, and what you did to Sihon and Og, the 2 kings of the Amorites east of the Jordan, whom you completely destroyed. When we heard of it, our hearts melted in fear, and everyone's courage failed because of you. For the Lord your God is God in heaven above and on the earth below. Now then, please swear to me by the Lord that you will show kindness to my family, because I have shown kindness to you. Give me a sure sign that you will spare the lives of my father and mother, my brothers and sisters, and all who belong to them, and that you will save us from death. Our lives for your lives, the men assured her. If you don't tell what we are doing, we will treat you kindly and faithfully when the Lord gives us the land. So she let them down by a rope through the window, for the house she lived in was part of the city wall. She said to them, go to the hills so the pursuers will not find you. Hide yourselves there 3 days until they return, and then go on your way. Now the men had said to her, this oath you made us swear will not be binding on us, unless when we enter the land you have tied the scarlet cord in the window through which you let us down, and unless you have brought your father and mother, your brothers, and all your family into your house. If any of them go outside your house into the street, their blood will be on their own heads. We will not be responsible. As for those who are in the house with you, their blood will be on our head, if a hand is laid on them. But if you tell what we are doing, we will be released from the oath you made us swear." "Agreed," she replied. "Let it be as you say." So she sent them away, and they departed. And she tied the scarlet cord in the window. When they left, they went to the hills and stayed there 3 days, until the pursuers had searched all along the road and returned without finding them. Then the 2 men started back. They went down out of the hills, forded the river, and came to Joshua, son of Nun, and told him everything that had happened to them. They said to Joshua, "The Lord has surely given the whole land into our hands. All the people are melting in fear because of us." Early in the morning, Joshua and all the Israelites set out from Shittim and went to the Jordan, where they camped before crossing over. After 3 days, the officers went throughout the camp, giving orders to the people. "When you see the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord your God and the Levitical priests carrying it, you are to move out from your positions and follow it. Then you will know which way to go, since you have never been this way before. But keep a distance of about 2,000 cubits between you and the ark. Do not go near it." Joshua told the people, "Consecrate yourselves, for tomorrow the Lord will do amazing things among you." Joshua said to the priest, "Take up the Ark of the Covenant and pass on ahead of the people." So they took it up and went ahead of them. And the Lord said to Joshua, "Today I will begin to exalt you in the eyes of all Israel, so they may know that I am with you as I was with Moses. Tell the priests who carry the Ark of the Covenant, when you reach the edge of the Jordan waters, go and stand in the river." Joshua said to the Israelites, "Come here and listen to the words of the Lord your God. This is how you will know that the living God is among you, and that he will certainly drive out before you the Canaanites, Hittites, Hivites, Perizzites, Girgashites, Amorites, and Jebusites. See, the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord of all the earth will go into the Jordan ahead of you. Now then, choose 12 men from the tribes of Israel, one from each tribe. And as soon as the priest who carries the Ark of the Covenant, the Lord of all the earth, set foot in the Jordan, its waters flowing downstream will be cut off and stand up in a heap." So when the people broke camp to cross the Jordan, the priests carrying the Ark of the Covenant went ahead of them. Now the Jordan is at flood stage all during harvest. Yet as soon as the priests who carried the Ark reached the Jordan and their feet touched the water's edge, the water from upstream stopped flowing. It piled up in a heap a great distance away, at a town called Adam in the vicinity of Zarethan, while the water flowing down to the Sea of Arabah, that is the Dead Sea, was completely cut off. So the people crossed over opposite Jericho. The priest who carried the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord stopped in the middle of the Jordan and stood on dry ground, while all Israel passed by until the whole nation had completed the crossing on dry ground. When the whole nation had finished crossing the Jordan, the Lord said to Joshua, "Choose 12 men from among the people, one from each tribe, and tell them to take up 12 stones from the middle of the Jordan, from right where the priests are standing, and carry them over with you, and put them down at the place where you stay tonight." So Joshua called together the 12 men he had appointed from the Israelites, one from each tribe, and said to them, "Go over before the ark of the Lord your God into the middle of the Jordan. Each of you is to take up a stone on his shoulder according to the number of the tribes of the Israelites, to serve as a sign among you. In the future, when your children ask you, 'What do these stones mean?' tell them that the flow of the Jordan was cut off before the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord. When it crossed the Jordan, the waters of the Jordan were cut off. These stones are to be a memorial to the people of Israel forever." So the Israelites did as Joshua commanded them. They took 12 stones from the middle of the Jordan, according to the number of the tribes of the Israelites, as the Lord had told Joshua. And they carried them over with them to their camp, where they put them down. Joshua set up the 12 stones that had been in the middle of the Jordan at the spot where the priests who carried the Ark of the Covenant had stood, and they are there to this day. Now the priests who carried the Ark remained standing in the middle of the Jordan until everything the Lord had commanded Joshua was done by the people, just as Moses had directed Joshua. The people hurried over, and as soon as all of them had crossed, the Ark of the Covenant and the priests came to the other side while the people watched. The men of Reuben, Gad, and the half-tribe of Manasseh crossed over, ready for battle, in front of the Israelites, as Moses had directed them. About 40,000 armed for battle crossed over before the Lord to the plains of Jericho for war. That day the Lord exalted Joshua in the sight of all Israel, and they stood in awe of him all the days of his life, just as they had stood in awe of Moses. Then the Lord said to Joshua, "Command the priests carrying the Ark of the Covenant law to come up out of the Jordan." So Joshua commanded the priest, "Come up out of the Jordan." And the priests came up out of the river carrying the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord. No sooner had they set their feet on the dry ground than the waters of the Jordan returned to their place and ran at flood stage as before. On the 10th day of the first month, the people went up from the Jordan and encamped at Gilgal. on the eastern border of Jericho. And Joshua set up at Gilgal the 12 stones they had taken out of the Jordan. He said to the Israelites, "In the future, when your descendants ask their parents, 'What do these stones mean?' tell them Israel crossed the Jordan on dry ground. For the Lord your God dried up the Jordan before you until you had crossed over. The Lord your God did to the Jordan what he had done to the Red Sea when he dried it up before us until we had crossed over. He did this so that all the people of the earth might know that the hand of the Lord is powerful, and so that you might always fear the Lord your God." Now when all the Amorite kings west of the Jordan and all the Canaanite kings along the coast heard how the Lord had dried up the Jordan before the Israelites until they had crossed over, their hearts melted in fear, and they no longer had the courage to face the Israelites. At that time the Lord said to Joshua, "Make flint knives and circumcise the Israelites again." So Joshua made flint knives and circumcised the Israelites at Gebeth Haralah. Now this is why he did so. All those who came out of Egypt, all the men of military age, died in the wilderness on the way after leaving Egypt. All the people that came out had been circumcised, but all the people born in the wilderness during the journey from Egypt had not. The Israelites had moved about in the wilderness 40 years until all the men who were of military age when they left Egypt had died, since they had not obeyed the Lord. For the Lord had sworn to them that they would not see the land he had solemnly promised their ancestors to give us, a land flowing with milk and honey. So he raised up their stones in their place, and these were the ones Joshua circumcised. They were still uncircumcised because they had not been circumcised on the way, and after the whole nation had been circumcised, they remained where they were in camp until they were healed. Then the Lord said to Joshua, "Today I have rolled away the reproach of Egypt from you, so the place has been called Gilgal to this day." On the evening of the 14th day of the month, while camped at Gilgal on the plains of Jericho, the Israelites celebrated the Passover. The day after the Passover, that very day, they ate some of the produce of the land, unleavened bread and roasted grain. The manna stopped the day after they ate this food from the land. There was no longer any manna for the Israelites, but that year they ate the produce of Canaan. Now when Joshua was near Jericho, he looked up and saw a man standing in front of him with a drawn sword in his hand. Joshua went up to him and asked, "Are you for us or for our enemies?" "Neither," he replied, "but as commander of the army of the Lord I have now come." Then Joshua fell face down to the ground in reverence and asked him, "What message does my Lord have for his servant?" The commander of the Lord's army replied, "Take off your sandals, for the place where you are standing is holy." And Joshua did so. Now the gates of Jericho were securely barred because of the Israelites. No one went out and no one came in. Then the Lord said to Joshua, "See, I have delivered Jericho into your hands, along with its kings and its fighting men. March around the city once with all the armed men. Do this for 6 days. Have 7 priests carry trumpets of ram's horns in front of the ark. On the 7th day, march around the city 7 times, with the priests blowing the trumpets. When you hear them sound a long blast on the trumpets, have the whole army give a loud shout. Then the wall of the city will collapse and the army will go up, everyone straight in." So Joshua son of Nun called the priests and said to them, "Take up the ark of the covenant of the Lord and have 7 priests carry trumpets in front of it." And he ordered the army, "Advance, march around the city with an armed guard going ahead of the ark of the Lord." When Joshua had spoken to the people, the 7 priests carrying the 7 trumpets before the Lord went forward, blowing their trumpets, and the ark of the Lord's covenant followed them. The armed guard marched ahead of the priests who blew the trumpets, and the rear guard followed the ark. All this time the trumpets were sounding. But Joshua had commanded the army, "Do not give a war cry, do not raise your voices, do not say a word until the day I tell you to shout. Then shout." So he had the ark of the Lord carried around the city, circling it once, and the army returned to camp and spent the night there. Joshua got up early the next morning, and the priests took up the ark of the covenant. The 7 priests carrying the 7 trumpets went forward, marching before the ark of the Lord and blowing the trumpets. The armed men went ahead of them, and the rear guard followed the ark of the Lord, while the trumpets kept sounding. So on the 2nd day they marched around the city once and returned to the camp. They did this for 6 days. On the 7th day they got up at daybreak and marched around the city 7 times in the same manner, except that on that day they circled the city 7 times. The 7th time around, when the priest sounded the trumpet blast, Joshua commanded the army, "Shout, for the Lord hath given you the city. The city and all that is in it are to be devoted to the Lord. Only Rahab the prostitute and all who are with her in her house shall be spared, because she hid the spies we sent. But keep away from the devoted things, so that you will not bring about your own destruction by taking any of them. Otherwise, you will make the camp of Israel liable to destruction and bring trouble on it All the silver and gold and the articles of bronze and iron are sacred to the Lord and must go into his treasury. When the trumpet sounded, the army shouted, and at the sound of the trumpet, when the men gave a loud shout, the wall collapsed. So everyone charged straight in, and they took the city. They devoted the city to the Lord and destroyed with the sword every living thing in it, men and women, young and old, cattle, sheep, and donkeys. Joshua said to the two men who had spied out the land, "Go into the prostitute's house and bring her out and all who belong to her, in accordance with your oath to her." So the young men who had done the spying went in and brought out Rahab, her father and mother, her brothers and sisters, and all who belonged to her. They brought out her entire family and put them in a place outside the camp of Israel. Then they burned the whole city and everything in it, but they put the silver and gold and the articles of bronze and iron into the treasury of the Lord's house. But Joshua spared Rahab the prostitute with her family and all who belonged to her, because she had hid the men Joshua had sent as spies to Jericho, and she lives among the Israelites to this day. At that time, Joshua pronounced his solemn oath, "Cursed before the Lord is the one who undertakes to rebuild this city, Jericho. At the cost of his firstborn son, he will lay its foundations. At the cost of his youngest, he will set up its gates." So the Lord was with Joshua, and his fame spread throughout the land. Joshua's so good. But the Israelites were unfaithful. I'll be right back. We're on chapter 7, by the way. Just started chapter 7. I gotta go do some quick. Alright. Chapter 7. But the Israelites were unfaithful in regard to the devoted things. Achan, son of Carmi, the son of Zimri, the son of Zerah, of the tribe of Judah, took some of them, so the Lord's anger burned against Israel. Now Joshua sent men from Jericho to Ai, which is near Beth-aven, to the east of Bethel, and told them, "Go up and spy out the region." So the men went up and spied out Ai. When they returned to Joshua, they said, "Not all the army will have to go up against Ai. Send 2,000 or 3,000 men to take it, and do not weary the whole army, for only a few people live there." So about 3,000 went up, but they were routed by the men of Ai, who killed about 36 of them. They chased the Israelites from the city gate as far as the stone quarries, and struck them down on the slopes. At this the hearts of the people melted in fear and became like water. Then Joshua tore his clothes, and fell face down to the ground before the ark of the Lord, remaining there till evening. The elders of Israel did the same, and sprinkled dust on their heads. And Joshua said, "Alas, sovereign Lord, why did you ever bring this people across the Jordan to deliver us into the hands of the Amorites to destroy us? If only we had been content to stay on the other side of the Jordan. Pardon your servant, Lord. What can I say now that Israel has been routed by its enemies? The Canaanites and the other people of the country will hear about this, and they will surround us and wipe out our name from the earth. What then will you do for your own great name?" The Lord said to Joshua, "Stand up. What are you doing down on your face? Israel has sinned. They have violated my covenant, which I commanded them to keep. They have taken some of the devoted things they have stolen. They have lied. They have put them with their own possessions. That is why the Israelites cannot stand against their enemies. They turn their backs and run because they have been made liable to destruction. I will not be with you anymore unless you destroy whatever among you is devoted to destruction. Go, consecrate the people. Tell them, consecrate yourselves in preparation for tomorrow. For this is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. There are devoted things among you, Israel. You cannot stand against the enemies until you remove them. In the morning, present yourselves tribe by tribe. The tribe the Lord chooses shall come forward clan by clan. The clan the Lord chooses shall come forward family by family, and the family of the Lord chooses shall come forward by man. Whoever is caught with the devoted things shall be destroyed by fire, along with all that belongs to him. He has violated the covenant of the Lord and has done an outrageous thing in Israel. Early the next morning, Joshua had Israel come forward by tribes, and Judah was chosen. The clans of Judah came forward, and the Zerahites were chosen. He had the clan of the Zaharites come forward by families, and Zimri was chosen. Joshua had his family come forward man by man, and Achan, son of Carmi, the son of Zimri, the son of Zerah, on the tribe of Judah, was chosen. Then Joshua said to Achan, My son, give glory to the Lord, the God of Israel, and honor him. Tell me what you have done. Do not hide it from me. Achan replied, It is true, I have sinned against the Lord, the God of Israel. This is what I have done. When I saw in the plunder a beautiful robe from Babylonia, 200 shekels of silver, and a bar of gold weighing 50 shekels, I coveted them and took them. They are hidden in the ground inside my tent with the silver underneath. So Joshua sent messengers, and they ran to the tent, and there it was, hidden in his tent, with the silver underneath. They took the things from the tent, brought them to Joshua and all the Israelites, and spread them out before the Lord. Then Joshua, together with all Israel, took Achan son of Zerah, the silver, the robe, the gold bar, his sons and daughters, his cattle, donkeys, and sheep, his tent, and all that he had to the valley of Acre. Joshua said, Why have you brought this trouble on us? The Lord will bring trouble on you today. And all Israelites stoned him. And after they had stoned the rest, they burned them. Over Achan they heaped up a large pile of rocks, which remains to this day. When the Lord turned from his fierce anger, therefore that place has been called the Valley of Acre ever since. Then the Lord said to Joshua, Do not be afraid, do not be discouraged. Take the whole army with you, and go up and attack Ai. For I have delivered into your hands the king of Ai, his people, his city, and his land. Ye shall do to Ai and its kings as you did to Jericho and its kings, except that you may carry off their plunder and livestock for yourselves. Set an ambush before the city. Behind the city, I meant. So Joshua and the whole army moved out to attack Ai. He chose 30,000 of his best fighting men and sent them out at night with these orders. Listen carefully. You are to set an ambush behind the city. Don't go very far from it. All of you be on the alert. I and all those with me will advance on the city, and when the men come out against us, as they did before, we will flee from them. They will pursue us until we have lured them away from the city, for they will say, They are running from us, as they did before. So when we flee from them, you are to rise up from ambush and take the city. The Lord your God will give it into your hand. When you have taken the city, set it on fire. Do what the Lord has commanded. See to it, you have my orders. Then Joshua sent them off, and they went to the place of ambush and lay in wait between Bethel and Ai, to the west of Ai. But Joshua spent that night with the people. Early the next morning, Joshua mustered his army, and he and the leaders of Israel marched before them to Ai. The entire force that was with him marched up and approached the city and arrived in front of it. They set up camp north of Ai, with the valley between them and the city. Joshua had taken about 5,000 men and set them in ambush between Bethel and Ai to the west of the city. So the soldiers took up their positions with the main camp to the north of the city and the ambush to the west of it. That night Joshua went into the valley. When the king of Ai saw this, he and all the men of the city hurried out early in the morning to meet Israel in valley at a certain place overlooking the Arabah. But he did not know that an ambush had been set against him behind the city. Joshua and all Israel let themselves be driven back before them, and they fled toward the wilderness. All the men of Ai were called to pursue them, and they pursued Joshua and were lured away from the city. Not a man remained in Ai or Bethel who did not go after Israel. They left the city open and went in pursuit of Israel. And the Lord said to Joshua, Hold out toward Ai the javelin that is in your hand, for into your hand I will deliver the city. So Joshua held out toward the city the javelin that was in his hand. As soon as he did this, the men in the ambush rose quickly from their position and rushed forward. They entered the city and captured it and quickly set it on fire. The men of Ai looked back and saw the smoke of the city rising up into the sky, but they had no chance to escape in any direction. The Israelites who had been fleeing toward the wilderness had turned back against their pursuers. For when Joshua and all Israel saw that the ambush had taken the city and that smoke was going up from it, they turned around and attacked the men of Ai. Those in the ambush also came out of the city against them, so that they were caught in the middle, with Israelites on both sides. Israel cut them down, leaving them neither survivors nor fugitives. But they took the king of Ai alive and brought him to Joshua. When Israel had finished killing all the men of Ai in the fields and in the wilderness where they had chased them, and when every one of them had been put to the sword, all the Israelites returned to Ai and killed those who were in it. 12,000 men and women fell that day, all the people of Ai. For Joshua did not draw back the hand that held out his javelin until he had destroyed all who lived in Ai. But Israel did carry off for themselves the livestock and plunder of the city, as the Lord had instructed Joshua. So Joshua burned Ai, and made it a permanent heap of ruins. a desolate place to this day. He impaled the body of the king of Ai on a pole and left it there until evening. At sunset, Joshua ordered them to take the body from the pole and throw it down at the entrance of the city gate, and they raised a large pile of rocks over it, which remains to this day. Then Joshua built on Mount Ebal an altar to the Lord, the God of Israel, as Moses, the servant of the Lord, had commanded the Israelites. He built it according to what is written in the book of the law of Moses, an altar of uncut stones on which no iron tool had been used. On it they offered to the Lord burnt offerings and sacrificed fellowship offerings. There, in the presence of the Israelites, Joshua wrote on stones a copy of the law of Moses. While the Israelites with their elders, officials, and judges were standing on both sides of the ark of the covenant of the Lord, facing the Levitical priests who carried it. Both the foreigners living among them and the native-born were there. Half of the people stood in front of Mount Gerizim, and half of them in front of Mount Ebal, as Moses, the servant of the Lord, had formerly commanded when he gave instructions to bless the people of Israel. I remember this. Afterward, Joshua read all the words of the law, the blessings and the curses, just as it is written in the book of the law. There was not a word of all that Moses had commanded that Joshua did not read to the whole assembly of Israel, including the women and children and the foreigners who lived among them. Alright, that's 8 chapters. I'll be right back. Quick, I just want to give thanks to the Lord. I prayed before the video that my throat's been sore and I've been coughing a little, and I asked him if during that I prayed that, hey, Lord, give me strength and give my soreness and coughness a rest while I read this, and I didn't cough a single time. My throat wasn't as sore, so I thank God for that, because he answered the prayer. So I thank you for that. Alright. Now for the notes. So we're gonna go to chapter 1 again. Of course, we always do this. We go back to the first chapter we read. You know the drill. But as the book of Joshua opens, the Israelites are camped along the east bank of the Jordan River at the very edge of the Promised Land, and they are completing the mourning period for Moses, who has just died. The Israelites had an opportunity to enter the Promised Land 39 years earlier, after spending a year at Mount Sinai receiving God's law. But they failed to trust God to give them victory. As a result, God did not allow them to enter the land, but made them wander in the wilderness until that disobedient generation had all died. During their wilderness wanderings, the Israelites obeyed God's laws. They also taught the new generation to obey God's laws so that they might enter the Promised Land, which was also called Canaan. As the children grew, they were often reminded that faith and obedience to God brought victory, while unbelief and disobedience brought tragedy. When the last of the older generation had died and the new generation had become adults, the Israelites prepared to claim their long-awaited Promised Land. Joshua succeeded Moses as Israel's leader. What qualifications did he have to become the leader of a nation? God appointed him. He was one of the only 2 living adults who had witnessed the Egyptian plagues and the exodus from Egypt. He had been Moses' personal aide for 40 years. The 12 leaders sent to scout out the Promised Land, only he and Caleb showed complete confidence that God would help them conquer. Because Joshua had assisted Moses for many years, he was well prepared to take over the leadership of the nation. Changes in leadership are common in many organizations. At such times, a smooth transition is essential for the successful establishment of the new administration. This doesn't happen unless the new leaders are trained. If you are currently in a leadership position, begin mentoring someone who will be able to take your place. Then when you leave or are promoted, operations can continue to run efficiently. If you aspire to be a leader, you need to learn from others so that you will be prepared when the opportunity arrives. Joshua's new job consisted of leading more than 2 million people into a strange new land and conquering it. What a challenge, even for a person of Joshua's caliber. Every new job is a challenge. Without God, this experience can be frightening. With God, it can be a great adventure. Just as God was with Joshua, he is with us as we face our new challenges. We may not conquer nations, but every day we face tough situations, setbacks, difficult people, and temptations. God promises, however, that he will never abandon us or fail to help us. When we ask God to direct us, we can be confident that he will walk with us through all of life's challenges. Verse 6 through 8 of chapter 1 says, "Be strong and courageous, because you will lead these people to inherit the land I swore to their ancestors to give them. Be strong and very courageous. Be careful to obey all the law my servant Moses gave you. Do not keep it from it to the right or Do not turn from it to the right or to the left, that you may be successful wherever you go. Keep this book of the law always on your lips, and meditate on it day and night, so that you may be careful to do everything written in it. Then you will be prosperous and successful." So many people think that prosperity and success come from having power, influential personal contacts, and a relentless desire to get ahead. But the strategy for But the strategy for gaining prosperity that God taught Joshua goes against such criteria. He said that in order to succeed, Joshua must be strong and courageous, because the task ahead would not be easy. We need to obey God's law and constantly read and study the book of the law, God's word. To be successful, we need to follow God's words to Joshua. You may not succeed by the world's standards, but you will be a success in God's eyes, and his opinion and rewards are more important than anything the world can offer. But how strange it sounds today to equate success with obedience. For many, success means controlling others. For Joshua, it meant being controlled by God. God told Joshua that to succeed, he must obey the rules for living found in God's law. Often, we can't see what the results or future benefits of following God's law will be. When we are not certain what to do, obedience to what God has revealed in the scriptures is the only sure step we can take. Resolve to set aside time each day to read and think about God's word. Remind yourself of God's words day and night. Act today on what you know God has said, and he will assure you success in carrying out his purposes. Let me see. Where's verse 15? Verse 12 to 15, I guess. "But to the Reubenites, the Gadites, and the half-tribe of Manasseh, Joshua said, Remember the command that Moses, the servant of the Lord, gave you, after he said, The Lord your God will give you rest by giving you this land. Your wives, your children, and your livestock may stay in the land that Moses gave you east of the Jordan, but all your fighting men ready for battle must cross over ahead of your fellow Israelites. You are to help them, until the Lord gives them rest, as he has done for you, and until they too have taken possession of the land the Lord your God has given them. After that, you may go back and occupy your own land, which Moses, the servant of the Lord, gave you east of the Jordan toward the sunrise." I got coughed up. I felt sore. I was sick yesterday, that's why I didn't do a video, but I feel a lot better today. I took some Tylenol this morning too. So. Anyway, during the previous year, the tribe of Reuben, half tribe of Manasseh, and who else was it? Gad. There we go, Gad. I'll be right back. Reuben, tribe of Gad, and half tribe of Manasseh had asked Moses if they could settle just east of the Promised Land. The area offered excellent pasture land for their large flocks. Moses agreed to give them the land on one condition, that they help their fellow tribes enter and conquer the Promised Land. Only after the land had been conquered could they return to their homes. Now the time had come for these three tribes, to live up to their end of their agreement. When others have helped us achieve our goals, we should also try to help them achieve theirs. Even if they didn't help us, we should help people anyway. It's called hospitality, and it's really nice. It's really kind. I don't like that word nice. If you know why, then you know why. But we need to stop and think about the goals you have achieved and any success you are enjoying. We need to help those who help us and help those who need help, even if they've never helped us in our life. So we need to do all we can, and we need to get all obstacles in our way to try and help people the best we can, no matter who they are to us. They can be our worst enemies. Help them. Jesus doesn't say, don't help your enemies. Instead, he says, reconcile with your enemies and help them anyway. Turn the other cheek. Do not be angry. Do not hold anything against anyone. But verse 16 says, then they answered Joshua, whatever you have commanded us, we will do, and wherever you send us, we will go. If everyone had tried to conquer the Promised Land their own way, chaos would have resulted. In order to complete the enormous task of conquering the land, everyone had to agree to the leader's plan and be willing to support and obey him. If we are going to complete the task God has given us, we must fully agree to his plan, pledge ourselves to obey it, and work together with others to put his principles into actions. Agreeing to God's plan means both knowing what the plan is, as found in the Bible, and carrying it out daily. Verse 18 says, whoever rebels against your word and does not obey it, whatever you may command them will be put to death. Only be strong and courageous. When God commissioned Joshua after Moses' death, he told him 3 times to be strong and courageous. He did that in verse 6, 7, 9, and he's doing it here as well. Here, Joshua was given the same kind of encouragement from the people. Apparently, he took God's message to heart, and he found the strength and courage he needed in his relationship with God. The next time you are afraid to do what you know God is calling you to do, you know that strength and courage are readily available from him. Verse 1 says, chapter 2, verse 1 says, then Joshua, son of Nun, secretly sent 2 men from Shittim. Go look over the land, he said, especially Jericho. So they went and entered the house of a prostitute named Rahab and stayed there. Why did Joshua send the spies secretly? As far as he knew, he would be attacking a heavily fortified city using conventional warfare tactics. He needed strategic information about the city for the upcoming battle, but he also knew that this move might draw criticism from the other leaders. After all, the last time spies were sent by Moses, the report they brought back caused disastrous problems. If you know, you know. But while he did not want to move ahead without information, he also did not want to confuse the people and cause them to question his wisdom and ability to lead the nation. Why would the Israelites stop at the house of Rahab, a prostitute? It was a good place to gather information and have no questions asked in return. Rahab's house was an ideal location for a quick escape because it was built into the city wall. God directed the spies to Rahab's house because he knew that her heart was open to him and that she would be instrumental in the Israelite victory over Jericho. God can use anyone to accomplish his great purposes, no matter what kind of past they have had or how insignificant they seem to be. Rahab didn't allow her past to keep her from the new role God had given her. Regardless of your situation, God can restore and redirect your life to serve him. All the people, God chose a prostitute. And that shows how far his unconditional love extends as well. It doesn't matter who you are, prostitute, murderer, liar, adulterer, God's going to choose you, God's going to love you, and you have the option, and I pray that you choose it, and I encourage you to choose it, that you choose the option to carry out God's will no matter who you are. So, verse 4 to 5 says, but the woman had taken the 2 men and hidden them. She said, yes, the men came to me, but I did not know where they had come from. At dusk, when it was time to close the city gate, they left. I don't know which way they went. Go after them quickly, you may catch up with them. So was Rahab justified in lying to save the lives of the Israelite spies? Although the Bible does not speak negatively about her lie, it clearly states that lying is a sin. In Hebrews chapter 11, verse 31, however, Rahab is commended for her faith in God. Her lie is not mentioned. Several explanations have been offered. God forgave Rahab's lie because of her faith. Rahab was simply deceiving the enemy, a normal and acceptable practice in wartime. Because Rahab was not an Israelite, she could not be held responsible for keeping the moral standards set forth in God's law. And Rahab broke one principle, telling the truth, to uphold another one, protecting God's people. There may have been another way to save the lives of the Israelite spies, but under the pressure of the moment, Rahab had to make a choice. All of us will face dilemmas at one time or another. We may see no perfect solution to the problem before us. Fortunately, God does not demand that our judgment be perfect in all situations, and He offers grace when we repent for our mistakes and even for our outright sins. He simply asks us to put our trust in Him and to do the best we know how. Rahab did that and was commended for her faith. Verse 6 says, "But she had taken them up to the roof and hidden them under the stalks of flax she had laid out on the roof." Flax was harvested and piled high on rooftops to dry it. It was then made into yarn, which was used to make linen cloth. Flax grows to a height of 3 or 4 feet, stacked on the roof in bundles. It made an excellent hiding spot for the spies. Verse 8 to 13 says, "Before the spies lay down for the night, she went up on the roof and said to them, 'I know that the Lord has given you this land, and that a great fear of you has fallen on us, so that all who live in this country are melting in fear because of you. We have heard how the Lord dried up the water of the Red Sea for you when you came out of Egypt, and what you did to Sihon and Og, the 2 kings of the Amorites east of the Jordan, whom you completely destroyed. When we heard of it, our hearts melted in fear, and everyone's courage fell because of you. For the Lord your God is God in heaven above and on the earth below. Now then, please swear to me by the Lord that you will show kindness to my family, because I have shown kindness to you. Give me a sure sign that you will spare the lives of my father and mother, my brother and sisters, and all who belong to them, and that you will save us from death.'" So, many would assume that Rahab, a pagan, a Canaanite, and a prostitute, would never be interested in God. Yet, Rahab was willing to risk everything she had for a God she barely knew. God was working in her life in a way most could not see. We must not gouge a person's potential interest in God based on background, lifestyle, or appearance. We should let nothing get in the way of our telling people the good news. Rahab recognized something that many of the Israelites did not. The God of heaven is not an ordinary God. He is all-powerful. The people of Jericho were afraid because they had heard the news of God's extraordinary power in parting the Red Sea and defeating the armies across the Jordan River. Today, we can worship the same powerful miracle-working God. He is powerful enough to destroy mighty, wicked armies as He did in Jericho. He is also powerful enough to save us from sudden death as He did with Rahab. Verse 15 says, "So she let them down by a rope through the window, for the house she lived in was part of the city wall." In Joshua's day, houses were often built into city walls. Many cities had 2 walls several feet apart, with houses built on wooden logs laid across the tops of the walls. In many cases, houses inside a city simply borrowed a wall from the city wall at the ground level and then added rooms above to the top of the city wall. This created a strong home with a view to the outside while also strengthening the city wall. Rahab lived in a house with a window that looked out over this outside wall. Verse 2 through 4 of chapter 3 says, "After 3 days the officers went throughout the camp, giving orders to the people, 'When you see the ark of the covenant of the Lord your God and the Levitical priests carrying it, you are to move out from your positions and follow it, and you will know which way to go, since you have never been this way before, but keep a distance of about 2,000 cubits between you and the ark. Do not go near.'" The Ark of the Covenant was Israel's most sacred treasure. It was a symbol of God's presence and power. The ark was a gold-covered rectangular box with 2 cherubim angels facing each other on the lid. Inside the ark were the tablets of the 10 Commandments Moses had received from God. A jar of manna, the bread God had miraculously sent from heaven during the wilderness wanderings, and Aaron's staff, the symbol of the high priest's authority. According to God's law, only the Israelites could carry the ark. The ark was constructed at the same time the tabernacle was also, and placed in the sanctuary's most sacred room. This is what it probably would have looked like, except that the lid wouldn't have fallen off like that. This is what it would probably have looked like. There's the two cherubim with two angels. It's the jar of manna. There's Aaron's staff. And here's the Ten Commandments. But, yeah. Verse 5, Joshua told the people, "Consecrate yourselves, for tomorrow the Lord will do amazing things among you." Before entering the promised land, the Israelites were to perform a consecration ceremony. This was often done. This happens every video. This was often done before making a sacrifice, or as in this case, before witnessing a great act of God. God's law stated that a person could become unclean for many reasons: eating certain foods, giving birth, dealing with diseases, touching a dead person. And God used these various outward signs of uncleanness to illustrate a person's inward uncleanness that comes as a result of sin. The consecration ceremony pictured the importance of approaching God with a pure heart and mind. Like the Israelites, we need God's forgiveness to cleanse our hearts and minds before we approach Him. Verse 9 says, Joshua said to the Israelites, "Come here and listen to the words of the Lord your God." Just before crossing over into the promised land, Joshua gathered the people to hear the words of the Lord. Their excitement was high. No doubt they wanted to rush into action, but Joshua made them stop and listen to what God wanted to tell them at that moment. We live in a fast-paced age where everyone is rushing here and there to keep up with their full agendas. We get caught up in the next task, too busy to listen to God's words, too busy to see what's most important. Before diving into your agenda each day, pause for a moment and focus on listening to God and seeking to know what He wants for you. Hearing from God before you rush into your day will remind you of His presence and clarify what He wants to do through and in you. Verse 10 says, "This is how you will know that the living God is among you, and that He will certainly drive out before you the Canaanites, Hittites, Hivites, Perizzites, Girgashites, Amorites, and Jebusites." Why would God help the Israelites drive out these nations from their native land? God had punished the people of Israel first for their disobedience. He then turned to the rest of the nations. Genesis 15 verse 16 implies that the people of Canaan were an evil people and needed to be punished by God for their terrible sins. Israel was to be God's vehicle for this punishment. Even more important was the fact that Israel, chosen by God to be a nation that worshipped Him alone, could not live among people who worshipped multiple gods and had no regard for the one true God, the God of Israel. Living in such an environment would make it difficult for the Israelites to reject their sinful practices. The only way to prevent Israel from being infected by these negative influences was to drive them out. But the Israelites failed to drive out everyone out as God had told them to do. And sure enough, it wasn't long before God's people began following the pagan practices of the Canaanites. Verse 13 to 17 says, "And as soon as the priests who carry the Ark of the Covenant, the Lord of all the earth, set foot in the Jordan, its waters flowing downstream will be cut off and stand up in a heap." So when the people broke camp to cross the Jordan, the priests carrying the Ark of the Covenant went ahead of them. Now the Jordan's at flood stage, all during harvest. Yet as soon as the priests who carry the Ark reached the Jordan and their feet touched the water's edge, the water from upstream stopped flowing. It pulled up in a heap a great distance away, at a town called Adam in the vicinity of Zarethan, while the water flowing down to the Sea of Arabah, that is the Dead Sea, was completely cut off. So the people crossed over Jericho. The priests who carried the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord stopped in the middle of the Jordan and stood on dry ground, while all Israel passed by until the whole nation had completed the crossing on dry ground. So, God had parted the Red Sea to let the people out of Egypt, and here He parted the Jordan River to let them enter Canaan. This isn't the only time the Jordan River isn't parted, by the way. It's parted 2 more times, but that's in like 2 Kings. These miracles showed Israel that God keeps His promises. God's promises, well, God's presence, not promises. God's presence among his people and his faithfulness to them made the entire journey from Egypt to the Promised Land possible. He was with them at the end of their wandering, just as he had been with them at their beginning. The Israelites were eager to enter the Promised Land, conquer nations, and live peacefully, but first they had to cross the flood-level waters of the Jordan River. God gave them specific instructions. In order to cross, the priests had to step into the water. What if these priests had been afraid to take that first step? Often God provides no solution to our problems until we trust him and move ahead with what we know he wants us to do. What are the rivers or obstacles in your life? In obedience to God, we need to take that first step. The Israelites crossed the Jordan River in the spring when it was overflowing its banks. God chose the time when the river was at its highest to demonstrate his power, parting the waters so that the entire nation could cross on dry ground. It had been many years since Israel had witnessed God's miracle of parting the Red Sea, and the younger people had only heard about it. So witnessing this miracle would have been a great encouragement that God was still with them. Some say that God used a natural occurrence such as a landslide to stop the waters of the Jordan. Others say he did it by a direct act. In either case, God showed his great power by working a miracle of timing and location to allow his people to cross the river on dry ground. This testimony of God's supernatural power served to be the Israelites' hope in God and give to them a reputation among their enemies who greatly outnumbered him. So chapter 4, after the people safely crossed the river, what would be next? Conquering the land? Not yet. First, God directed them to build a memorial from 12 stones drawn from the river by 12 men, one from each tribe. This may seem like an insignificant step in their mission of conquering the land, but God did not want his people to plunge into their task without first reflecting upon all he had done for them up to this point, as well as their need for him to be with them for the future challenges. They needed to pause to focus on him and remember who was guiding them. As you are busy doing your God-given task, we need to set aside quiet moments to build your own memorials to God's power. Too much activity may shift your focus away from him. Verse 14 of chapter 4 says, That day the Lord exalted Joshua in the sight of all Israel, and they stood in awe of him all the days of his life, just as they had stood in awe of Moses. So, the Israelites revered Joshua for his role in leading them across the Jordan River. He, like Moses, would receive Israel's praises generation after generation. This was in large part because of God's unique favor upon Joshua, but it was also because of Joshua's relentless commitment to obey God and be his servant. Although Israel was not a world power at that time, Joshua's reputation for handling his responsibilities God's way brought him greater recognition than if he had been a hero in a superpower nation. Doing God's work God's way is more important than striving for recognition. Though sometimes God brings recognition to those who do right, and they will certainly be recognized in his eyes. Verse 21 through 24 says, He said to the Israelites, In the future, when your descendants ask their parents, What do these stones mean? Tell them, Israel crossed the Jordan on dry ground. For the Lord your God dried up the Jordan before you until you had crossed over. The Lord your God did to the Jordan what he had done to the Red Sea, and he dried it up before us until we had crossed over. He did this so that all the people of the earth might know that the hand of the Lord is powerful, and so that you might always fear the Lord your God. Imagine being Joshua witnessing all of this. That had to be amazing, especially for Joshua. And Caleb too. Caleb witnessed a lot of this as well. Moses probably happy on Mount Nebo knowing Joshua was going to successfully succeed him and be the greatest conqueror. So, 1 second. We need to take a little quick break. Let me go get a drink. So, oh my goodness. I almost swallowed the cough drop too much. The memorial of 12 stones was to be a constant reminder of the day the Israelites crossed the Jordan River on dry ground. Their children would see the stones and hear the story and learn from God's power. And they would learn about God as well. Do you have traditions, special dates, or special places to remind you and the people around you of God's work in your life? Do you take time to tell others what God has done for you, how He has forgiven and saved you, answered your prayers, met your needs? Let your memories of God's faithfulness become traditions that serve as monuments, reminders of God's work in your life and His care for you. Verse 1 of chapter 5 says, Now when all the Amorite kings west of the Jordan and all the Canaanite kings along the coast heard how the Lord had dried up the Jordan before the Israelites until they had crossed over, their hearts melted in fear, and they no longer had the courage to face the Israelites. So, the Amorites and Canaanites were the two major groups living in Canaan at the time of Israel's invasion. The Canaanites worshipped a variety of gods, but Baal was the most prominent god in their pantheon, whatever. Canaanite culture was materialistic, and the people's religious practices were sensual. After entering the land of Canaan, the Israelites continually fell into the worship of Baal. The Amorite gods also affected Israel's worship and turned people away from worshiping the true God. Worshipping these false gods eventually led to Israel's downfall. The Israelites had spent 40 years in the wilderness unnecessarily because they were terrified of the Canaanites. They had underestimated God's power to bring them victory, and He had allowed their fear to derail their first attempt to enter the Promised Land. Now, the Israelites could see that the Canaanites were afraid of their army. The Canaanites had heard about Israel's great victories through God's power. They had probably hoped that the Jordan would slow the Israelites down and discourage them from entering Canaan, but news that the Israelites had crossed the Jordan or dry land caused any courage the Canaanites still had to melt away. Do not underestimate God. If we are faithful to Him, He will cause even great opposition to disappear. Though our life challenges, no, not life challenges, well, yeah, kind of, though our challenges may be too great for us to overcome alone, God can work behind the scenes to make anything possible that fits within His plan for us. Verse 2-3 says, At that time the Lord said to Joshua, Make flint knives and circumcise the Israelites again. So Joshua made flint knives and circumcised the Israelites at Gebeth Haarath. So, the rite of circumcision marked Israel's identity as God's covenant people. When God made the original covenant with Abraham, He required that each male be circumcised as a sign of cutting off the old life and beginning a new life with God. Other cultures at this time used circumcision as a sign of entry into adulthood, but only the Israelites used it as a sign to show that they belonged to God. Verse 8-9 says, And after the whole nation had been circumcised, they remained where they were encamped until they were healed. Then the Lord said to Joshua, Today I have rolled away the reproach of Egypt from you, so that people had been called Gilgal to this day. Located about 2 miles northeast of Jericho, Gilgal was Israel's base camp and temporary center of government and worship during the invasion of Canaan. Here the people renewed their commitment to God and His covenant before attempting to conquer the new land. At Gilgal, the angelic commander of the Lord's army appeared to Joshua with further instructions for battle and encouragement for the conquest. After the conquest, Gilgal continued to be an important place in Israel. It was here that Israel's first king, Saul, was crowned, which we're going to be reading in a few weeks, probably. Verse 10 says, On the evening of the 14th day of this month, while camped at Gilgal on the plains of Jericho, the Israelites celebrated the Passover. This joyous Passover was the first to be celebrated in the Promised Land and only the third celebrated by Israel since the Exodus from Egypt. The last time had been at the foot of Mount Sinai 39 years earlier. This celebration reminded the Israelites of God's mighty miracles that brought them out of Egypt. There, they had to eat in fear and haste. Now the age is celebration of God's blessings and promises. Verse 11 through 12 says, the day after the Passover, that very day, they ate some of the produce of the land, unleavened bread and roasted grain. The manna stopped the day after they ate this food from the land. There was no longer any manna for the Israelites, but that year they ate the produce of Canaan. So, God had supplied manna to the hungry Israelites during their 40 years in the wilderness. In the bountiful promised land, they no longer needed their daily food supply because the land was ready for planting and harvesting. God had miraculously provided food for the Israelites while they were in the wilderness. Here he provided food from the land itself, but now it would not appear miraculously. They would have to work for it. God can and does provide miraculously for his people as needed, but he also expects them to use the talents and resources he has given them to provide for themselves. Prayer is not an alternative to preparation, and faith is not a substitute for hard work. If your prayers have gone unanswered, perhaps what you need is within your reach, and you have a part to play. Try praying instead for the discernment to know whether this is the case, and if so, pray for the wisdom to see what your part is and the energy and motivation to carry it out. Verse 14 through 15 says, Neither, he replied, but as commander of the army of the Lord I have now come. Then Joshua fell face down to the ground in reverence and asked him, What message does my Lord have for his servant? The commander of the Lord's army said, Take off your sandals, for the place where you are standing is holy. And Joshua did so. This man was an angel of superior rank, the commander of the Lord's army. Some say he was in appearance of God in human form. As a sign of respect, Joshua took off his sandals. Although Joshua was Israel's commander, he was still subordinate to God, the highest leader. All in respect are the responses due to our holy God. How can we show respect for him? By our attitudes and actions, we should recognize God's power, authority, and deep love, and our actions must model our reverence for him. Respect for God is not just as important today as it was in Joshua's day. Respect for God is just as important today as it was in Joshua's day, even though removing shoes may not be our cultural way of showing it. And some people think that this commander of the Lord's army was Michael the Archangel, because, he's the commander of the Lord's army. He's also very superior in rank. He also beats the crap out of Lucifer. We hear about it in Jude, how he fought over Moses' dead body and rebuked the devil. And also, whenever in Revelations, when that time comes, Michael will beat up the red dragon, aka Lucifer. He will Romans 16:20, that red dragon, if you know the reference. But chapter 6, we hear about the city of Jericho, which, built thousands of years before Joshua was born, was one of the oldest cities in the world. In some places, it had fortified walls up to 25 feet high and 20 feet thick. Soldiers standing guard on top of the walls could see for miles. Jericho was a symbol of military power and strength. The Canaanites considered it invincible. Israel would attack the city first, and its destruction would put the fear of God's people into the heart of every person in Canaan. The Canaanites saw Israel's God as a nature god because he had parted the Jordan River, and as a war god because he had defeated Sihon and Og. But the Canaanites did not consider him a fortress god, one who could prevail against a walled city. The defeat of Jericho showed that Israel's God was not only superior to the Canaanite gods, but also invincible. Verse 2 through 5 says, Then the Lord said to Joshua, See, I have delivered Jericho to your hands, along with its king and its fighting men. March around the city once with all the armed men, and do this for 6 days. Have 7 priests carry trumpets of ram's horns in front of the ark. On the 7th day, march around the city 7 times, for the priests blowing the trumpets. When you hear them sound a long blast on the trumpets, have the whole army give a loud shout. Then the wall of the city will collapse, and the army will go up, everyone straight in. God told Joshua that Jericho was already delivered into his hands. The enemy was already defeated. What confidence Joshua must have had as he went to battle. Christians also fought against a defeated enemy. Our enemy, Satan, has been defeated by Christ. Although we still fight battles every day and sin runs rampant in the world, we have the assurance that the war has already been won. We do not have to be paralyzed by the power of a defeated enemy. We can overcome him through Christ's power. Why did God give Joshua all these complicated instructions for the battle? Several answers are possible. God was making it undeniably clear that the battle would depend upon him, not upon Israel's weapons and expertise. This is why priests carrying the ark, not soldiers, led the Israelites into battle. God's method of taking the city accentuated the terror already felt in Jericho. This strange military maneuver was a test of the Israelites' faith and their willingness to follow God completely. The blowing of the trumpets had a special significance. The same trumpets used in their religious festivals were to be blown in their battles to remind them that their victory would come from the Lord, not their own military might. Verse 17 through 21, which says, the city and all that is in it are to be devoted to the Lord. Only Rahab the prostitute and all who are with her and her house shall be spared, because she hid the spies we sent. But keep away from the devoted things, so that you will not bring about your own destruction by taking any of them. Otherwise, you will make the camp of Israel liable to destruction and bring trouble on it. All the silver and gold and the articles of bronze and iron are sacred to the Lord and must go into his treasury. When the trumpet sounded, the army shouted, and at the sound of the trumpet, when the men gave a loud shout, the wall collapsed. So everyone charged straight in, and they took the city. They devoted the city to the Lord and destroyed with the sword every living thing in it, men and women, young and old, cattle, sheep, and donkeys. So, why did God demand that the Israelites destroy almost everyone and everything in Jericho? He was carrying out severe judgment against the wickedness of the Canaanites. This kind of judgment, called a ban, usually required that everything be destroyed. Because of their evil practices and intense idolatry, the Canaanites were a stronghold of rebellion against God. This threat to the right kind of living God required had to be removed. If not, it would affect and spread throughout all Israel like cancer. A few people and some items in Jericho were not destroyed, but these were special cases. Rahab and her household were saved because she had faith in God and because she had helped the Israelite spies. The silver and gold and articles of bronze and iron were also preserved, not to enrich the people, but to beautify the tabernacle and its services. God's purpose in all this was to keep the people's faith and religion uncontaminated. He did not want the plunder to remind Israel of Canaanite practices. God also wants us to be pure. He wants to cleanse us from sin and idolatry when we begin our new lives with him. We must not let the desire for personal gain distract us from our spiritual purpose. We must also reject any objects or images that remind us of our old lives or of rebellion against God. Verse 26 says, at that time Joshua pronounced this solemn oath, cursed before the Lord is the one who undertakes to rebuild the city Jericho. At the cost of his firstborn son, he will lay its foundations. At the cost of his youngest, he will set up its gates. This curse was fulfilled in 1 Kings chapter 16, verse 34, when a man named Hiel rebuilt Jericho and consequently lost his oldest and youngest sons. Some believe that Hiel actually sacrificed his sons and placed them in the foundation and gave masonry to ward off evil. Thus, we see Achan take plunder. We need to notice the results of Achan's sins. They were told not to take any plunder, but he took a robe from Babylonia that he thought looked cool? He took that. That was also Gentile clothing, probably had mixed fabrics as well, which anyone in Israel, in Leviticus, it says not to have two mixed fabrics. And that's probably the robe from Babylonia had mixed fabrics in it as well. But notice the result of Achan's sins. Many men died. There was 36 men who died whenever they pursued IE because of Achan's sins. And also after that, Israel's army melted in fear. Joshua questioned God because of this, and God threatened to withdraw his presence from the people, and Achan and his family had to be destroyed. On the other hand, when the Israelites eliminated the sin from the community, these were the results. God's encouragement, God's presence in battle, God's guidance and promise of victory, and God's permission to keep the plunder and livestock from the battle for themselves. Throughout Israel's history, blessings came when the people got rid of their sin. You will also experience blessings when you turn from your sin and follow God's plan wholeheartedly. Verse 1 says, But the Israelites were unfaithful in regard to the devoted things. Achan, son of Carmi, the son of Zimri, the son of Zerah, of the tribe of Judah, took some of them, so the Lord's anger burned against Israel. The devoted things were the clothing, cattle, and other plunder that God had said the Israelites should destroy when they conquered Jericho. It was not that Achan had found a good use for something that was going to be thrown out anyway. What he had done was a serious offense because it was in direct defiance of an explicit command of God. Verse 6 says, Then Joshua tore his clothes and fell face down to the ground before the ark of the Lord, remaining there till evening. The elders of Israel did the same and sprinkled dust on their heads. Joshua and the elders of Israel tore their clothing and put dust on their heads, as signs of deep mourning before God. They were confused by their defeat at the small city of Ai after the spectacular Jericho victory. So they went before God in deep humility and sorrow to receive victory and his instructions. When our lives fall apart, we also should turn to God for direction and help. Like Joshua and the elders, we should humble ourselves so that we will be able to hear God's words. Verse 7 through 9 says, And Joshua said, Alas, sovereign Lord, why did you ever bring this people across the Jordan to deliver us into the hands of the Amorites to destroy us? If only we had been content to stay on the other side of the Jordan. Pardon your servant, Lord. What can I say now that Israel has been routed by its enemies? The Canaanites and the other people of the country will hear about this, and they will surround us and wipe out our name from the earth. What then will you do for your great name? For your own great name? So, when the Israelites first went against Ai, they did not consult God, but trusted their military strength to bring victory. Only after Israel was defeated did they turn to God and ask what had happened. Joshua had experienced his first setback. Now what would he do? Instead of jumping to plan B, he did what he should have done in the first place. He prayed. Too often, our first move is to rely on our own skills and strength, especially when the task before us may seem easy. We go to God only when the obstacles seem too great. However, only God knows what lies ahead. He may want us to learn lessons. We need to lay down our pride or consult others before he will work through us. We are best off when we talk things over thoroughly with God before moving forward. Going to him, even when we are on a winning streak or when details seem insignificant, may save us from making grave mistakes or misjudgments. Verse 7 through 9 says, I already read 7 through 9. What am I doing? Imagine praying this way to God. This is not a formal church prayer. It is the prayer of a man who is distraught and confused by what is happening around him. Joshua poured out his real thoughts and emotions to God. Hiding our needs from God is ignoring the only one who can really help us. God welcomes our honest prayers and wants us to express our true feelings to him. We can be more honest in prayer by remembering that God is all-knowing and all-powerful, and that is love for us. And that his love for us never ends. I'll be right back. We're reading verses 10 through 12 next, so. Alright, verse 10 through 12. The Lord said to Joshua, Stand up, what are you doing down in your face? Israel has sinned, they have violated my covenant which I commanded them to keep. They have taken some of the devoted things, they have stolen, they have lied, they have put them with their own possessions. That is why the Israelites cannot stand against their enemies. They turn their backs and run because they have been made liable to destruction. I will not be with you any more unless you destroy whatever among you is devoted to destruction. Why did Achan's sin bring judgment on the entire nation? Although it was one man's failure, God saw it as a national disobedience to a national law. God needed the entire nation to be committed to the job they had agreed to, conquer the land. Thus, when one person failed, everyone failed. If Achan's sins went unpunished, unlimited looting could break out. Idols might be taken as plunder. The nation as a whole had to take responsibility for preventing this undisciplined disobedience. Achan's sin was not merely his keeping some of the captured plunder, something God allowed in some cases, but rather his disobedience to God's explicit command to destroy everything connected with Jericho. Achan's sin was indifferent to the evil and idolatry of the city, not just a desire for money and clothes. God will not protect Israel's army again until the sin was removed and the people returned to obeying him without what's the right word for this? Reservation. Yeah. God is not content with our doing what is right some of the time. He wants our hearts to turn toward him all the time. We are under his orders to eliminate any thoughts, practices, or possessions that hinder our devotion to him. Verse 13 says, "Go consecrate the people, tell them, consecrate yourselves in preparation for tomorrow, for this is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. There are devoted things among you, Israel. You cannot stand against the enemies until you remove them." Consecrate yourselves meant that the Israelites were to undergo a purification ceremony like the one mentioned in chapter 3, verse 5, before entering into the promised land, when they were preparing to cross the Jordan River as well. Such practices prepared the people to enter in God's presence and routinely, I don't know why I struggle to say routinely, reminded them of their sinfulness and his holiness. Verse 24 through 26 says, "Then Joshua, together with all Israel, took Achan's son Zerah, the silver, the robe, the gold bar, his sons and daughters, his cattle, donkeys, and sheep, his tent, and all that he had to the valley of Achor. Joshua said, 'Why have you brought this trouble on us? The Lord will bring trouble on you today.' And all Israel stoned him, and after they had stoned the rest, they burned them. Over Achan they heaped up a large pile of rocks, which remains to this day. Then the Lord turned from his fierce anger. Therefore that place has been called the Valley of Achor ever since." Achan underestimated God and disobeyed his commands. Taking a robe and some silver and gold may have seemed a small thing to Achan, but the effects of his sin were tragic for the entire nation, especially his family. Like Achan's, our actions affect other people and just ourselves. Watch out for the temptation to rationalize your sins by saying they are too small or too personal to hurt anyone but you. So, why did Achan's entire family pay for his sins? The biblical record does not tell us that they were accomplices to his crime, but in the ancient world the family was treated as a whole. Achan, as the head of his family, was like a tribal chief. If he prospered, the family prospered with him. If he suffered, so did they. Many Israelites had already died in battle because of Achan's sin. Now he and his descendants were to be completely cut off from Israel. Achan's entire family was stoned along with him, so that no trace of the sin would remain in Israel. In our permissive and individualistic culture, we have a hard time understanding such a decree. But in ancient cultures, communal punishment was common. The punishment fit the crime. Achan had disobeyed God's command to destroy everything in Jericho, thus everything that belonged to Achan had to be destroyed. Sin has drastic consequences, so we should take drastic measures to avoid it. Verse 1 of chapter 8 says, "Then the Lord said to Joshua, do not be afraid, do not be discouraged, take the whole army with you, and go up and attack Ai, for I had delivered into your hands the king of Ai, his people, his city, and his land." So after Israel had been cleansed from Achan's sin, the Lord commanded Joshua to attack Ai again, this time to win. The Israelites had learned some lessons that we can follow. Confess your sins when God reveals them to you, and when you fail, refocus on God, deal with the problem, and move on. God wants the cycle of sin, repentance, and forgiveness to strengthen us, not weaken us. The lessons we learn from our failures should make us better, able to handle a similar situation the second time around. Because God is eager to give us cleansing, forgiveness, and strength, the only way to lose is to give up. We show what kind of people we are by what we do on the second and third attempts. Verse 2 says, "You shall do to Ai and its kings as you did to Jericho and its kings, except that you may carry off the plunder and livestock for yourselves, set in ambush behind the city. So, why did God allow the Israelites to keep the plunder and livestock this time? Israel's laws for handling the spoils of war covered two situations. Cities like Jericho, which were under God's ban, judgment for idolatry, could not be looted. God's people were to be kept holy and separate from every influence of idolatry. The distribution of captured plunder from cities not under the ban was a normal part of warfare. It provided God's people with the necessary food, flocks, and weapons needed to sustain themselves in wartime. Ai was not under the ban. The conquering army needed the food and equipment because soldiers were not paid. The plunder was part of their incentive and reward for going to war. Reward for going to war. I said war for going to war. It was reward for going to war. Verse 3 says, So Joshua and the whole army moved out to attack Ai. He chose 30,000 of his best fighting men and sent them out at night. The conquest. Oh my goodness. The conquest of Ai was very important to the Israelites. Only 11 miles away from Jericho, Ai was a key stronghold for the Canaanites and a buffer fortress for Bethel. If the Canaanite kings got wind of an Israelite defeat at Ai, they could unite in a coordinated attack. They did not know that God had restored his power and protection for Joshua's troops. We must depend on God with absolute obedience to be sure of the victory he has promised. Verse 18 to 19 says, Then the Lord said to Joshua, Hold out toward Ai the javelin that is in your hand, for into your hand I will deliver the city. So Joshua held out toward the city the javelin that was in his hand. As soon as he did this, the men in the ambush rose quickly from their position and rushed forward. They entered the city and captured it and quickly set it on fire. The Lord gave Joshua the city. That was clear. Yesterday's defeat became today's victory. Once sin is dealt with, forgiveness and victory lie ahead. With God's direction, we do not need to stay discouraged or burdened with guilt. No matter what setbacks sin may bring, we must renew our efforts to carry out God's will. Verse 30 through 31 says, Then Joshua built on Mount Ebal an altar to the Lord, the God of Israel, as Moses, the servant of the Lord, had commanded the Israelites. He built it in accordance to what is written in the book of the law of Moses, an altar of uncut stones on which no iron tool had been used. On it they offered to the Lord burnt offerings and sacrificed fellowship offerings. The altar was to be built out of uncut stones, so it would be holy. This would prevent the people from worshipping altars like idols or worshipping the craftsmanship of the workers rather than the great works of God. Verse 32 says, There in the presence of the Israelites, Joshua wrote on stones a copy of the law of Moses. It was most likely the 10 Commandments that Joshua copied on the stones. These were the heart of all God's laws for the Israelites, and they are still to be followed today. Verse 35 says, There was not a word of all that Moses had commanded that Joshua did not read to the whole assembly of Israel, including the women and children and the foreigners who lived among them, which included Rahab and her family. Joshua acted in obedience by gathering the people together and reading the law that God had originally given through Moses, reminding the people of all it said. God knows how easily we forget what he tells us. Like the Israelites, we constantly need to review what God has said in his word. We should not read the Bible as we read most other books one time quickly. You don't just read all the way through and be like, oh, no, hey, nice book. We should read it over and over again as a constant reminder of who God is and what we can become if we obediently follow him. So that's it. That's chapters 1 through 8. I might do another video on chapters 9 to 16. And then after that, we'll have one more video. Joshua is not a big book compared to the law books. Then we'll be on Judges. So, yeah. Big thing is to be courageous. Do not be discouraged. We need to be strong and brave. That's like the main message of Joshua. We need to be faithful in God and know that he has already delivered into our hands victories as long as we're faithful and obedient towards him. If you do not follow his word, how do you think you're going to earn victory? You're going to earn victory by being obedient and faithful towards God. That's how you succeed in life. You pray, you be faithful in that prayer, and you believe you have already received it, and if so, you have already received it. Yeah, another Joshua video soon. Father, Son, Holy Spirit. Lord, I thank you today. I ask that you can give us courage, Lord, I ask that you can allow us to be obedient, Lord. I ask that you can strengthen our faith, Lord, because you are faithful too. We also are faithful because you love, we also love, Lord. I ask that anyone who doesn't have you can find you, Lord, and if people already do have you, they can continue to pursue you, Lord. I ask that those who already do have you can go around and encourage others to spread the word and encourage others to follow you, Lord. I ask that you give us courage, bravery, and strength to spread your word, Lord. I ask for missionaries who are in dangerous countries, who are in places where they are persecuted, that they can be joyful of their persecution, knowing that they're doing it for you, Lord, and that knowing that their reward will be abundant and will be many in the life to come, Lord. I ask that you will deliver us into successfulness as we be obedient and faithful to you, Lord. And if we aren't even successful, Lord, if we're just, failing in life, at least we are failing in the world's eyes and not in your eyes, because we're being obedient and faithful to you, Lord. We may fail in the world, but we will never fail in heaven whenever we're obedient and faithful to you, Lord. I pray that we can be shining in your eyes and not in the world's eyes. If we're shining in the world's eyes, we are full of sin, we are full of flesh, we are full of evil. But if we're shining in your eyes, we're full of obedience, faith, courage, strength, and bravery, Lord. We're full of love, joy, peace. We're full of everything good. We're full of the fruit of the Spirit, Lord. I ask that you fill us with the fruit of the Spirit, Lord, and not evils of the flesh. I ask all these things, and I thank you for all these things, because I know you have already delivered these out to your people, Lord. I ask of all these things, and I thank you, Lord. And I pray all this in your name. Amen.
Thank you for watching.
Good night. God bless. Love you all.